Okay, hello there, and welcome to the Fox Den. Nistu anagok biksipidaki. I am Andrea Truejoy Fox, your host for Talks with a Fox. I'm happy you have joined me on this colorful adventure of self-discovery and lifelong learning. Throughout my journey, I have met some amazing human beings who are living inspirational and intentional lives as they fulfill their purpose and share their gifts with the world. I am excited to share these conversations with you, as well as some stories from my life as a Blackfoot woman, Metepenagiag, and as a teacher and artist who is navigating through this exciting and beautiful world we live in, challenges and all. So grab a tea or coffee and get ready to feel inspired as you reflect on your own exciting journey and your connection to the world. We are in this together, and there is so much for us to learn and share. Let's do this. I just want to thank you for following this wonderful journey and for connecting with Talks with a Fox on all of our social media and liking and commenting on our page. We appreciate all the inquiries that we have received regarding how you can further support Talks with a Fox podcast. So we have gone ahead and set up a Patreon account where you can subscribe and support the podcast. Feel free to go to patreon.com/Talks with a Fox podcast. There's also a link to the Patreon page on our Buzzsprout page where you can donate the amount of your choosing. It means so much to me that you are on this journey with us. Okay, idamik sitigek sistigo nistu anagok biksipidaki. I'm Andrea, your host for Talks with a Fox. Today we have a super exciting episode because we are live on location here in the beautiful Blackfoot territory, and we are going to be talking with an incredible artist. She comes from the East Coast with her ancestral roots there, but she's based here in Alberta as well. And we get to see each other and be in the same room to talk, which is just so exciting for me because, as you know, with COVID and the whole quarantine life right now that we are all still learning to figure out, we don't always get to see people. But of course, with the safe practice of social distancing, we're making it happen today. So without further ado, I want to introduce the lovely Julia Rose Sutherland, who comes from Metepenagiag Mi'kmaq Nation. She is an interdisciplinary artist with her practice, which utilizes mediums as photography, sculpture, and performance. And we're going to unpack all of the amazing things that she has been creating, and more importantly, how she utilizes her art practice and her gifts of addressing very important issues that impact Indigenous people across North America. Welcome, Uki Julia.
Thank you so much for having me, Andrea. I'm so excited and humbled and grateful to be here to have these conversations with you. It's unbelievable. And right now, Andrea didn't mention we're sitting here in Blackfoot territory overlooking the beautiful hills at the Galt Museum and Archives. So what an amazing place to have conversations, an amazing person to have it with.
Wow. I was just so happy that we were able to coordinate, and I wanted to pick a location that would allow us to feel really connected with the land. And like you said, we've got these huge windows and these huge views of the land out here. And I also wanted it to be a place and a space that connects to the work that Julia does. While we are in a museum, when we think about the archives, images, history, the work that Julia does, your work is very much speaking to the past and how it's interconnected to everything today as an Indigenous person, woman, community member. So first of all, what are you working on right now?
Well, that's a great question. Working on a lot of stuff, preparation stuff for shows, but physically manifestations right now. I'm actually working on quill work. So Argonian and Mi'kmaq, which is a process of embellishment and embroidery done with porcupine quills. So it's something I'm really passionate about. My great aunt Betty Ann taught me how to do this in her kitchen while smoking and drinking red rose tea. So there's a lot of fun memories with that, sitting with her. But of course, quill work is a traditional Mi'kmaq craft applique, I guess you would call it, but it's something we've been doing for thousands of years. And right now I'm doing a lot of text work. And this was, I was working on quill work for sure in my graduate career too, at the University of Buffalo in Buffalo, New York. But I was doing more sculptural work, more performative work with the quill work, which is something I'm still pursuing. But I'm taking some more time to do something more traditional in the sense of the way that I'm using quills, less explorative, and more as a way to use texts. And it kind of a contemporary, it's also contemporary, but it's kind of speaking to more to the classical ways that you would use it. So there's a three-step, a series of three I'm making right now that'll be shown in Toronto at the end of October, actually, at a art, I guess you call it an art fair, art auction and fair, which is interesting. But it was started when Rodney Levi, my cousin, was shot twice in the chest and murdered earlier this summer. So the work was made, one, in meditation, two, in protests, and to digest what was happening, and three, in a way to educate or to bring up dialogue. So this is what the work is about. So the first piece that you'd find on my website or Instagram says, "Fuck the police." And this was my first initial reaction of hearing the news that Rodney was shot. I'd read it on Facebook. And same with his, immediate family was on Facebook, which was also really disturbing and really awful. The RCMP had called Chief Bill Ward, a family member of mine, telling him what had happened, but hadn't alerted his immediate family. And so we were following this on Facebook, And so when I found out, I went to the bathroom, I hit the floor, and that's the first thing I said was, "Fuck the police," which is maybe vulgar. But it was how I was feeling at the time. And I thought, I needed to do something with my hands. I'm an artist. This is what I do. I make work that's political, that is looking at my life experiences. So that was my response was, hey, I'm going to do some quill work to pay homage in a way, but also to really think about what was happening and to digest the situation. In the midst of COVID, Black Lives Matter, and all these things, it's already on my mind. Racial injustices and police brutality is already on my mind. So this gave me a chance, and has been giving me a chance to kind of think through these things. Take your initial reaction, which might have been aggressive, might have been, in the moment, but then taking that and using it in a way, and using traditional craft to think through it, and what do you mean? What do you mean by when you say things like that? So then it's progressed to defund the police, which could be controversial to some, but in my mind, allocating money from a big entity like the police RCMP to help social programming that will support them better, but support the community. Where does this money go to? And the last piece says refund communities. Again, going from one initial feeling and going through being methodical and thought out. And so that's what I'm working on right now.
Wow, I love that. So very necessary work. I mean, as an artist, there's almost a feeling of responsibility to bring forth or uncover issues or social injustices that happen, especially to marginalized people, and in this case, being Indigenous. And first of all, I'm sorry. My condolences about your family member, Rodney. So sad. And I remember talking with your sister about it when it happened, and my thoughts are with you and his family, because as we know, it's not just what happened, it's also the aftermath of what happens to our families, to our communities, and the spiritual trauma of that as well. But I'm particularly interested in your work, Julia, because of everything it brings forward, and you're just real with it. You're not creating it for the purpose of even solely aesthetics. When we think of art, sometimes people think, well, creating to be beautiful or creating to polish but in this case, it's very much about a mirror that you're putting up to society to show what is happening and to not only create awareness, but to hold society accountable for what has happened. And I think art is a beautiful vehicle to do that. I want to talk about your piece that I remember when you were in the midst of creating during your MFA in Buffalo, New York. I believe it was titled The Deeply Loved Flesh. Mm-hmm. Yes, that piece. Can you talk about that? As a woman, I was just very, I connected with it personally in so many ways, and seeing what's happened with our Indigenous women, the violations, the trauma, and the resilience. Can you talk about Deeply Loved Flesh?
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing up that piece. I've been thinking about this work a lot lately. Mm-hmm. It was recently just shown at a gallery called WAP, Will Abel's Art Projects in Vancouver, just off East Hastings. And this work is, I don't know where I came up with this saying, deeply loved flesh. I'm thinking about the skin a lot. I was in the grad school, and skin and concerns about the skin, perception, racialization, discrimination, marginalization, all of these different things. But also, how beautiful the flesh is, how enticing the flesh is, how is it used as a commodity. So this work was, started out of, my research about skin as a commodity and a trading of a substance, how people consume things, thinking about things in a cannibalistic manner. And so when I made this beautiful sign, there's something really evocative about neon. I've always loved neon. And for those at home, it's a 24 by 24 inch neon sign that says "Deeply Loved Flesh" in cursive writing, and a red neon. So it's referencing also things, like the red light district. It's referencing girls, 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 XXX, porn. This idea of sex. And I'm thinking about sex trade. I'm thinking the way that we sell bodies, and then thinking about, here on Turtle Island and in Canada, thinking about who is being sold, what is being sold, how do we consume the body, how do we consume the marginalized body. And so this work was, in one, to kind of speak to those notions, but also mostly to speak to women, and any sex worker, and it doesn't have to be to women, of course, but to speak to sex workers in general and humanize that, and to talk about this idea of the beauty of the body and the beauty of the flesh, but also to look at, the other side of this, who is buying this, who's selling this. So this work fits on many different levels for me. For me, it's like a beacon of hello, a beacon of remembrance too. And of love, to talk about love and lateral love. Oftentimes we talk about lateral violence, especially within these communities with marginalized people, but to me, it's about love and loving the body and feeling at home in your body and acceptable in your body, no matter who you are. And I think there's a lot of negative, when you think about sex work, there's a lot of negative connotations. And we see on media too, people, the way they talk about people who are in this work, it's so dehumanizing. And I just think it's not about that. It's about connection and about the body as this beautiful thing. And so that's really what that work was about. So I was so excited when Will Abel, he just called me up and he said, "Hey, I've seen your work. I would love to show this piece." Wow. And I thought, that's amazing. And he's like, I'm on East Hastings, this work it's an after hours piece. It was only turned out at night, and it was not meant for people to come in, the everyday, white art lover or just everyday art daytime lover. It was for, sex workers. That's what the piece was for. Yeah. And I was so thrilled to have that piece shown in Vancouver, to be seen and to glow at night for someone else. Not for the typical gallery goer. So that was an intention. So I was so thrilled and happy that it was received, by another BIPOC artist and curator to say, "Hey, I understand what you're doing. I see it." So it was nice that happened.
Wow. Yes. The images that go through my mind right now, and intentionally creating it for a certain audience. And I love how you talk about, again, art can be seen as a privilege, creating art, or those who appreciate it, the patrons, or a certain culture. But with your art, it's accessible to anybody, and it's also honoring, well, this piece in particular is honoring of the people that perhaps may not fit into those groupings, if you will. So creative, though. Also, I have to speak to your creativity too. I mean, and it's truly a gift, and to have it even in the evening, as opposed to daytime, and I wonder, I'm just thinking out loud here, but I really wonder about the people that you created this for, that community, and what their thoughts would be on this, and or just to see somebody say, hey, I see you, and you matter, and your body matters, and you are loved. That's incredible. And, we may make an assumption that maybe they don't always get to hear that or see that within themselves because of how society perceives them and speaks of them rather than to them or with them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing too, of making this work too, and the intention of who it's for. But I don't know how it's received by that community either. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed in my own practice. I mean, it's forever. We're always growing. We're always seeing different things, changing our perspectives and evolving. So I think this is also what's the next step? You go to grad school, like you mentioned. I made this piece when I was in Buffalo, New York, in grad school. And you're there for 2 years, and you're having the worst time of your life. It's the best. I loved grad school. I had some of the best times of my life. But it was also this torturous, weird time where you have to do a million different things at once. Anyone who's been to grad school, you know what I'm talking about. And then you're tired. You don't know what's going on. You're writing the thesis. You're also making work. You're also going to all these things. And so sometimes you don't think about what's going to happen with that work. That we talked earlier about aftercare. What's that aftercare of that work going to be like? When you're just making the work, you're making production. And you're thinking about things maybe more academic terms, which is also, productive, and it's good to do, but sometimes you got to think about what does this mean on humanistic terms. And I think that's the goal of my work, whether I'm meeting it or not, is to think about things, how do I make this humanistic, and what does that say, and who am I making it for, why am I making it for, and how is it serving those communities? So it's something, that I'm thinking about now and sitting with myself for a long time to say, what do I do next? How does this work go? How do I go next? Where does it go?
Wow, very, very important questions. And I would, from what I've understood in our Indigenous communities, that's pretty much what the Indigenous artist lens is about, is not just creating for self, but really creating for community, keeping community in mind, and that responsibility to how the message you're putting out there is projected and how society may then take it, receive it, and translate it. Because really what we do as Indigenous people is, as we walk around in society, we are almost seen as a one voice for all, when really we're all unique individuals. We are connected to community, but we do carry that responsibility, and I will say sometimes a burden, But I think just your approach to your creation in your art practice is very telling of who you are, not only as an artist, but also an Indigenous woman, and how you came into this world as an artist and the way you look at things. Speaking of, can you tell us about your community, your Mi'kmaq? And by the way, everybody, one of my best friends is Julia's sister, Amanda. I just got to give Amanda a shout out. I love you, Amanda.
She's going to love that.
That's how Julia and I got to meet, and it's just been amazing. And speaking on that note, I also had the lovely joy of working with Julia previously, bringing Julia into one of the public school districts in Lethbridge, Alberta, to work with a group of Indigenous students and non-Indigenous students on truth and reconciliation understandings, getting these children and youth to basically tell us what they think of truth and reconciliation. Because as adults, we can often say, this is what I think it is, or this is what it is. Now take this information and go with it. But this piece, this particular group was really about, we want to hear from you because you are that next generation. And Julia came in and did a beautiful piece with the students, and they got to use their hands, and she was talking and telling stories, and the kids were listening and absorbing what she was sharing with them. So thank you, Julia, for coming down and doing that. I really enjoyed that work from a teacher perspective, but also just seeing how the kids interacted with you. So anyways, I just wanted to give everyone a little history on how Julia and I met, and so grateful to continue to stay connected. And I have yet to go out to your community, but Amanda and I have talked about it. When she's out that way, that's when I'm going east, and she'll get to share and show where you ladies are from. So can you tell me more about your community?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's Red Bank, New Brunswick. That's where the reservation is. Originally from Nova Scotia, but relocated to Red Bank, New Brunswick, which is a beautiful area. I mean, just across from Moncton. Okay. So the Metepenagiag Mi'kmaq tribe is there. Chief Bill Ward, who is my cousin, is currently part of Chief and Council, of course, leading it up. And they're doing amazing strides of, we talk about sovereignty and having a sovereign nation and self-sufficiency. They're amazing. They're wonderful, and they're doing such amazing things in terms of education initiatives. So for me, I mean, we haven't been there in a while. I don't know if Matt has talked to you about this, but it's been quite a while. My mother used to be there, so we would be us visiting her, as well as my great-grandmother. But it's just, like my grandma has 8 siblings, wow. 6 still living, all at the reservation, and they're just like the most amazing, wonderful group of knowledgeable people with everything. Like I was saying, Betty Ann, my great-aunt, taught me how to quill. You know what I mean? Like, it's amazing. It's a really beautiful area, too. I mean, of course, on the news right now, like, I can't help but think about what's happening right now in Nova Scotia, if you're following along, with, rights to fishing and trapping of animals. In the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia are experiencing a lot of turmoil right now from aggressive lobster catchers. I don't know if you're following this, but this has been what's happening. So there's also this idea of like this beautiful sovereign nation who has all these amenities in place and are like taking care of themselves in the communities in so many wonderful ways. But there's also this pushback. So there's this constant frustration happening. And it's really hard to be away, when Rodney passed, it's hard because you're so far away from your family or from that community that you want to be with. But there's also like this beautiful resilience happening of people coming together and being there and rallying behind. So it's quite a wonderful place. I mean, unlike Lethbridge, and we're looking at this like the prairie territories, it's rivers, forests, and water. So it's a wonderful little haven of a spot, but there's also, I mean, things that I work with alongside of my work are talking about, trauma, sublimation, substance abuse, and in Moncton, Fredericton, and in Red Bank, there is a huge issue right now at hand. So, this is happening all over Canada, and I don't think it's an Indigenous problem. I think it's a Canadian problem that needs to be addressed. But it's something I'm thinking about a lot, about, being at home and my family and what is happening, especially to the youth, and my younger family and what's going to happen. But I see this trend of just beautiful resilience and education happening, and I love it. So that's a little bit about my community. And I'm doing a lot of work with notions of alternative healing methods, in particular looking at the sun dance and at sweat lodges. And I'm lucky, I know it's COVID, I can't go there and I can't be necessarily at home, if you will, but I'm having this amazing opportunity of being mentored digitally, virtually, especially by my uncle, Jeffrey Ward, who is a fire keeper, he is a knowledge keeper, and he's a sun dancer. So I'm learning all these new things in a different way than I thought I would. We kind of talk about, learning the Indigenous perspective as, an active, you're there, hands-on approach. Yeah. But this is an interesting thing, though, now that you can actually you have these connections digitally. And it's weird. And I don't know if it's only because of COVID. This is really, I'm thinking about it this way, but it's so interesting. It's like I can be so far away, but yet I'm still connected. And those teachings are still potent to me. It's very beautiful.
Yes. Wow. I mean, we have to do what we can to grasp and access these teachings especially as our elders get older. We want to make sure we continue to take time to sit with them or to talk with them and to learn and listen. And I think that's great that you're doing that. And I mean, you have to get creative when you live on one side of the country and they live on the other side.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you just want to, you get the beck and home though. Like you want to be there. And it's especially in times of turbulence.
Yes.
There's something about that for me where I just want to be there, be with people and, learning different perspectives. It's so important. So, I mean, in future plans, all these things, you just start thinking, how do you prioritize things? Even my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who is Mi'kmaq, she is even at this point where she said to me, I want to move back east to be closer to my family. She's like, you're my family here, of course. And she moved here for us to begin with, me and my sisters. But she starts looking at it and says, I want to be near my sisters and my other family too. And you start to prioritize things. So it's a big thing. And to also think about landscape and a home geographically too. And what does that mean? I mean, like home is Calgary for me, but also like home is tradition,
Yes.
And I didn't, it's interesting being in Buffalo on the East Coast,
Yes.
Just past the border of Toronto and Ontario there, and feeling closer to home than ever before, because, I'd open a book and I'm doing research and they'd talk about the Mi'kmaq. Like, we're there. Like, there's no question about it. Everything you open, everything you're reading, you're there.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, wow, is this what it feels like to be transplanted, instead of being so far away from quote unquote home. Where is home? So I think about this a lot in my work too, like perspective, location, and home, and what does that mean? And I think, I felt very at home in Buffalo, of all places, Buffalo, New York.
Well, you spent 2 years there?
Yeah.
So, and by the way, congratulations on your convocation. That was last year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So amazing, and you're an artist that is just. You're on this momentum, but this journey, and it's beautiful that you've been sustaining that because, it's a lot to live in one place and then to move back or move somewhere and then retransition. But what I've been observing of your work, and I follow your journey as you continue to create and connect with what is going on in your world and the world at hand. I just want to mention a few of the themes that come out of your work or what you're addressing. Yes, so you're covering very important subjects: addiction, mental health, feminism, Aboriginal identity, politics. What has been the response, if you will, from maybe people or communities connected to these areas, or have you had a chance to engage with people who have encountered these, whether they were in your own community or just in general?
That's a great question. I've received, amazing feedback from people, which is really awesome. Because, I'm not making this work necessarily to show at a gallery to get a grant. I'm making the work because I feel it's necessary to make. But I happen, especially in Buffalo, New York, I was in the Haudenosaunee Nation amongst the Seneca and Tuscarora people. I was a guest for them. And I was making a lot of work dealing with indigeneity while being a guest in a different territory. And I received such great counsel there. And I was so lucky, especially from the Indigenous community there. So it was really, that's kind of what keeps me going. And then also receiving from family members in New Brunswick and the Ontario region, actually. I get these messages just from aunts and uncles being like, I'm so proud, what you're doing is great, and they just can't believe it. And I think that's really gratifying in a lot of ways to hear that. It's also gratifying to hear that I'm maybe not, the syntax or the way that I'm writing things is proper. They're like, oh, yeah, that's right. I am trying to be more familiar with my language, mother tongue, although it's definitely hard and it's something you have to strive to do. But my Uncle Rob once, he wrote me an email saying, wow, you did such a great job. You really put the effort into that. And, that's just a show of respect. So I have been receiving some good feedback, and I love that too. And I'm currently doing artist in residence with the Women's Center of Calgary. So also working workshops, doing talks online, digital stuff. And that's been also receiving some really great feedback about the work in general. But there's always more to be had. There's always more community to have. I know it's hard, COVID, it's hard right now in the pandemic of things to be with people, but I feel like it just has to happen. And I want to foster community too. I've always felt a little bit outside of the community, and I don't know if it's because I'm far away from home or because, I went to a high school with 2 other Indigenous students other than my sisters, or, I went to university and there was Indigenous Center started after I graduated. Sometimes you just feel out of it, but also being white passing, which is something that is really important to my work and to the context of the work that I make. As a white passing Indigenous person, I have an immense privilege and a different perspective, and it's something that has to be taken into account all the time. And it's something that weighs on my work and my identity all the time. I never, you read my statement too, and it says, I'm half Mi'kmaq, half, a little bit Irish, Scottish, and then Cree line on my grandfather's side. But it's something you got to think about, So community is really important, and every time I get a little grasp of it, I just feel so enriched. And I think that's also another step too, is how do I foster community versus how do I find community? Those are 2 different things, I can, go to a workshop, or I can meet with people, and, I can attend a powwow, or I can attend a regalia. You can do these things and you feel a certain way, but also where is my initiative and the step of fostering that? And I find that with my artwork, it gives me a little bit of, I would say, it gives me the ropes, you know what I mean? So, for example, in Buffalo, New York, when I had my thesis show at the SIPA Underground Gallery, I had a piece called Metepenagiag, which means paying homage. Okay. And this piece was 308 names of Indigenous women in Canada who had been murdered or killed, and according to the RCMP, on suspicious ways. So, they had died, but it would be a woman, let's say, her head was smashed in, and then they say, oh no, it's not suspicious, or Tina Fontaine was on this list, and you're going, this is not an accident. This is very much so an intentional, ongoing genocide in Canada.
Yes.
And then so this piece included 308 names, all individually embossed on a piece of paper, gridded on a wall, and viewers were invited to come into the space, burn sage, use the ash from the sage, to then take their finger, put it on top of the name, and then you would see the name highlight out because it was embossed in, and then you were to say their name out loud as a part of just giving remembrance, or even citing that you've seen this name, acknowledgement of this and feeling that name, and what does that mean to feel it. And then, of course, they were given a QR code they could scan into and then read the stories of each woman, because I thought that was also very important. And this work, for me, creates community, community in terms of paying homage into ancestry and to these women. It's a very emotional piece. I think about, vulnerable women. I think about my mom a lot, and I think about what that feels like to be missing or to be gone. And, you see these headlines and people say, oh, that's really sad, or it's always so sad. But I said, but there's so much resilient, beautiful community in that as well, and the people behind that. And I think it's important to acknowledge. And I found a really interesting thing happening there, where I was having these amazing, open and frank discussions with so many different people, not just white settlers or other people not involved in the community, but Indigenous communities too. And this led to a lot of conversation about, again, lateral kindness and love, which was all part of this idea. And the thesis show was called Engakt, which means taken care of, which was such a part of the way that I was looking at things. I make work that's antagonistic or that is sad. People always say, oh, it's sad, but it's also supposed to be hopeful and to look at these other facets of things, of love and of compassion, of humanizing. So I feel like that's where I can create community in a sense. And then, of course, it's where I want to strive to work on more and to build up further.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And as you were telling me this, I started thinking about your piece titled Mother. Uma, Mama, mother. Did I say it right? Okay, that was, wow, so incredibly captivating. The whole, it's like a sweat lodge, the way it's shaped. But can you tell me more about it and the flesh colors that you used? And your work very much speaks to the female voice and the Indigenous female voice. And as you were talking about Tina Fontaine and the other many women in our communities who have suffered and, their lives were ended through violence. It's unfortunate, but this has been going on for hundreds of years, since settlers had arrived, and what has happened and is happening to our women. And yes, maybe it is sad, and maybe your work makes people feel uncomfortable and have to look inward and ask themselves, well, what can I do? Often that's something, as a teacher and educator, I often get asked by settlers is, well, what can I do to basically address reconciliation? How can I be part of that? Or what can I do to make a difference? And it's good to ask those questions, but it's also, it is a Canadian, like you said, it's a Canadian problem, and it's a Canadian responsibility to look inward and to ask, what am I doing or what am I not doing? Silence is violence, If you're not participating in any type of way, and activism doesn't necessarily have to be participating in a protest or a march. It's in your attitude in itself, because how you behave and think is how you're going to go out into society. When you see that Indigenous woman or you see that Indigenous person you encounter, how you think of them is how you're going to behave towards them and interact or not interact with them. And I think of your art and all of this. Well, you just talked about our women especially, and our women are so very special and sacred beings because we bring life into this world, and that's how our communities continue to grow and expand. And when we think of the genocide you talked about and the sterilization of Indigenous women, that right there is in itself saying that the world, the societies that participate in that violence and genocide to us is saying that you don't matter and that Indigenous women don't belong in this world, and it's time that we take charge of those dialogues. And even as artists, it shouldn't just be us alone. However, often the weight of that falls on our shoulders, and the work that you're doing is very deep, it's very profound, and I would imagine there's a lot that comes with it, the emotional feelings that you feel when you're reflecting, like you said, in your own family and your own histories, and then attached to the Indigenous community. Your piece, Uma, Mama, Mother. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely.
Because that's what came to mind.
Absolutely. I mean, this deals with motherhood, and it deals with labor on all levels. And actually, this is the second time I made this piece So the first time I made this piece when I was in my undergrad in a fiber installation class. And the big joke was that I just made a giant womb. And everyone was like, this is so funny. Why would you make this womb? But I was concentrating on making safe spaces, comfortable spaces that felt organic, that felt welcoming, that, again, was about community and people. And then later on, when I went to Buffalo, I had an amazing opportunity to go to China, to go to Beijing, China, to do a residency there and work along collaborators. So this was a collaborative piece. So, the work had already been kind of made, but I was working with two other people kind of discussing ideas, and motherhood and labor were so important to us. And that was the biggest thing. We were just a bunch of feminists sitting there in China, trying to think about what to make. And it kind of, this idea of the womb was really important, and of craft. So I have a background in craft. I went to what is now the Alberta University of Arts, formerly known as ACAD, Alberta College of Art and Design. And my specialty was the textiles and new media. So my degree is in craft, which is there's a whole nother thing, debate about craft and fine art. But I've always been a crafty person, so there we are. But this piece was made in response to the idea of labor directly, and of unseen labor and of unacknowledged labor, especially by women. So the piece itself was a hand-woven sweat lodge dome shape, and then you go inside, and it was hand felted and dyed felt in a flesh pinky color.
Wow.
And then at the top of it, there was an opening meshed with the felt that you would go into, and you could sit in this space. You could sit up to 6 people in this quote unquote womb, we would call it, or in my mind, it's a sweat lodge. It's about healing and meditation, and it's a warm space. But it's also, again, this idea of the womb and of growing and of taking introspective time and to think and to feel comfortable within that space. And you would go into the space, and we had a heartbeat sound. So which also, for me was like indicative and throwback to this idea of drumming, of pacemaking, of being in a place, and a grounding as well. And it was interesting, the reception of this was like people would not get out of the womb. They wouldn't leave it. They would just want to stay in it, which is nice. Or they were repulsed by the womb, which is, I feel, is how, the woman's body is received in reality or in practical life. Either it's repulsive or it's a place of birth, out of immense power. So it does deal with, exactly what you were saying about power. I mean, like, this is where we come from. Like, it's something so integral to the being of life. That's the thing you need. This is the catalyst that brings you in. This is the vessel. So thinking about vessel too, but then also thinking about, like, what does this emulate in my history, or where do we go, and how is that used in my culture? And so the sweat lodge is something that I've been very interested in, and thinking about how does that work, and is that why it's such a transformative practice or ritual, ceremony, if you will, So I'm working with this now. So I'll be going to the Bemis Center of Contemporary Art next summer now. It's been postponed because of COVID, but I'll be there December 2021, working on a sweat lodge series with the Pawnee Nation there. So it'll be really interesting to be working again with a different nation, different people, different customs, different everything, and seeing how this will translate and what I can learn from this experience, and think about, for me, the sweat lodge being the womb, or being an extension of the womb, an extension of healing, an extension of growth.
Wow, that's such powerful work. And I really want to see this installation in person, and I want to sit inside of it. I'm just picturing it all, even the lighting from the images that I've seen, and imagining myself in such a safe space, and essentially that's also what women really need. And people at the end of the day need safe spaces where we can share, where we can heal, where we can connect. And that's why I'm such a fan of your work, Julia, because you address hard issues that not just anyone can or wants to talk about. And then you provide these nurturing pieces as well that bring feelings of safeness, and that, like you said, that hope that we can have safe spaces. There are safe spaces, because, when we get lost in the statistics or the darker side of things that are happening, we also need to see and feel that hope and see that love and that light. And as an artist, you're able to bring these all forward, and it's a beautiful balance, I would say. And I would also imagine for yourself healing in other ways, and also just it's work that fills you back up, I would imagine.
It does. And I think also it talks about universality. I made something similar in the past, but I had to go to China, to Beijing, to meet these two beautiful women, Yang and Eunice, to talk about these same issues, about safety, about women, about that kind of power, vulnerability, but also resilience, So it was really interesting to, think about it in a global way as well, rather than just like, this is how I feel about things, but also like making this work in tandem with these two other beautiful women, and saying, okay, where do I see myself in this, and how does this relate to me and my own practices? And so it's almost acting as a jump off point too. And I think that's why it's so important to collaborate, to talk with others, get other perspectives, because it's not necessarily just about my perspective. It shouldn't be about my perspective only, I think that's also what's really important. And also just trying to be in tandem with other people and other communities, and how does that work? But the universality of some of the work, I think, is important to think about, because I think, there's so many marginalized communities. There's so much happening in the world. And what's going to make us stronger is coming together, and to have conversations, and to have these dialogues, and to, again, make space, like you're talking about. Like, we're talking about space as in this installation, but literally making space for that to happen with people, I think, is so important. So it's something I'm also thinking about. I'm thinking about lots of things.
That's the mind of an artist. You know, you never stop thinking and creating and envisioning and, you know, speaking life into things that sometimes other people who maybe are not connecting with their artistic voice or identity, you know, you get to do that and help people reimagine. Also the possibilities, which I always believe that, you know, you're an educator, and, you know, whenever you're in a role of educating others and sharing and teaching, as daunting as things may look, as human beings, we also really need that hope. We need to see that. And when I think of allies, I think that sharing that with them empowers them to fulfill that role as an ally, an authentic ally, because there's allies out there, you know, and who, in fact, are often doing a disservice to Indigenous people. I say allies in quotes because, you know, that's also another place where people are speaking for Indigenous people rather than just, you know, letting the Indigenous person speak for themselves and empowering themselves. I believe that we really can empower ourselves rather than empowering others. You know, through the work you may inspire someone, but as human beings, and in this case as Indigenous people, it's really on us to empower ourselves. And to give ourselves permission to do what we need to do, to be authentic and to address issues and to be the teachers of what has been happening. And your work as an artist is very informative. You're bringing that forward, and your work is allowing others to have the hope, but also to look at their own assumptions, and then how can they then go forward? You know, okay, now what do I need to do next? I always say, what is the next thing? What is the next step? Because we can have the knowledge, but if we're not applying it, then it's basically like a beautiful, wonderful, thick book of knowledge on the shelf, and you're not reading it, you know? But your work inspires and invokes people to be accountable and to look at how they can be a true ally in becoming aware, becoming informed, and then supporting Indigenous people. And when I say that, I say it's supporting Indigenous people to make the decisions they need to make for themselves, you know. So I wanted to ask you about, well, actually, I really appreciate how in your artist statement, the trickle-down effect, how a lot of your current work is the concept of the trickle-down effect. So the intergenerational trauma, you know, that's a whole other area of life that Indigenous people endure, is the intergenerational trauma. Like, you and I didn't go to residential schools, but our families did, and we are therefore impacted by that. One thing I always, to help put it in perspective physically, I may look okay, you know, as we speak, you know, we all walk around, we're resilient, we're, you know, doing our best to fulfill our purpose and keep going, keep trudging along. But inside, you know, for the person in society, they may look at it and you say, well, there's nothing wrong with them. They look okay, or, you know, they're doing just fine. However, there are the psychological effects. There's the emotional effects. But I always say, okay, if you would like a physical validation that I have been impacted by residential school, well, one is that I'm speaking English. I'm not speaking in my mother tongue right now, Blackfoot, as a fluent speaker. So there's your evidence.
Yes, thank you for saying that. 100%. People don't think about this, you know, the colonial impact. They say, you know, it's so monetary. They want a monetary value.
Yeah.
They want to see it. They want statistics. That's what they want from you. And they want it to be written by someone of authority. And what does authority mean to them? It's wild to me. It's wild. It just makes me, I'm going to go off on a tangent, you know. But it's true, you know, like the trickle-down effect, I think, is so real. And people are so soon to close that off and not think about this idea of lateral violence in communities, and where does that violence come from? Where does this come from? You know, I feel the same thing that you're speaking about. Like, people will say, you look fine, you're doing fine, you know, like, you were educated, all these things, and all these things are great, but all these things don't mean anything. I'm not okay, and it's okay not to be okay. That's how I feel.
Yes.
And I'm going to say that I'm literally not okay. Like, you know, life is hard, and it's hard for anyone. But when you're dealing with communities that have been trampled on, who've been cut off from their traditions, from their language, from their customs, from everything that they've ever known, and you've beaten, raped, abused, and dehumanized them, still to this day, in this ongoing genocide of these customs and the peoples, it has an effect. I think about, especially Indigenous youth living on reservations or in, far off community areas, isolated away. I don't know how they do it, I'm lucky I was brought up by an amazing grandmother, and I had my amazing sisters with me to support me. I was surrounded by beautiful brown bodies that taught me they were okay, or that they were valued, they were loved, that I was loved. But I was also brought up around bodies that were hurt, who were in turmoil. It's called the soul wound, is what I kind of think of it. It's not this you have a scar on your face to show that you've been hurt, but it's in your soul. And it is like what you just said, like the evidence is that I don't speak my mother tongue, that you weren't brought up with your mother tongue, that maybe you don't know your customs. And it's hurtful, and it's hard because, you search for that. And we're also on the site of all of this too. It's not just like, I could go to Scotland and learn about my Scottish heritage, I'm home, I'm here. Like I'm on this land, and I'm constantly being told I don't belong here, or that there's something innately wrong with me, or that I'm a mythos, that I don't exist. I think about this a lot. And I think about this a lot in terms of how this affects, again, youth. And what does that mean? And then think about how can I positively impact that too? And I think that it comes down to this idea of decolonizational practices. We could talk about truth and reconciliation all we want, but reconciliation is a dirty word in my mind. It's non-existent. It doesn't mean anything. It's a blanket statement. I have issues, clearly. I think about this. But I think that decolonizational practices, especially as an educator, is so integral to the progress of Canada and what Canada could look like.
Yes.
And just education. And it's hard in these times. I look at the Jason Kennedy government and I'm pretty disappointed and I'm pretty infumed and I'm upset thinking about educational cuts. I'm thinking about healthcare, everything, that all directly affect Indigenous people.
Yes.
And not in you're not educating us, but you're not educating them. And educating the general Canadian. And they're doing them a disservice. You're doing us a disservice. So I think about trickle-down effect a lot. This notion, and I think it comes down to the solution to this is education, and who's teaching that education.
Yes.
Because as you said, it's like I know a lot of people that I know who are in education, and I'm so happy for that. But when you're teaching young children about Indigenous studies of Canada, it should be taught by an Indigenous person.
Yes.
Someone who knows not just knows what they're talking about in terms of academic excellence. That's also a thing. Like I'm glad that people are educated and getting educated. That's amazing. But I'm talking about it from experience. From living through that soul wound we talk about that I mentioned, like living through that. And that's what's important. Representation, authentic representation.
That is so important. I mean, you look, I'll use my community for an example. There's so many people that have gone out to go get their teaching degrees, principals, they've gone on to do their masters, PhDs. And then I look in the systems off reserve and I say, where are these people? I know they're not all working in their community because, first of all, there's not enough jobs for them to be able to, not enough schools. But then I look around and I say, where are these people? I myself was one of those people. I did have a position in off reserve, and that was a very challenging, traumatic experience for me, being the only Indigenous female principal in a very homogenous district. And I had my challenges. And this isn't just in this area localized, it's across the country. It's very problematic that we don't see Indigenous educators, enough of them in the education systems teaching Indigenous children and all children. And like you said, Julia, having that Indigenous voice and lived experience is so essential to really truly educating the people who are now going to be the next generation of the leaders, political leaders, the people making policy, who are going to create legislation and who are going to ultimately shape how this country looks in the next 10, 15, 20 years. When we sit here right now, as we sit here in 2020, do we want to be sitting here even 5 years from now, having these same conversations about accountability, about authentic leadership, about, Indigenous leadership, I don't want to. I'm tired of it. I'm exhausted by it and living it. We live it every day, where when you go into the store, you encounter it. When you go into your different communities, when you go, somewhere and you look around and again, you're the only Indigenous voice at the table. That's old. That's very old and outdated, and we need to move past that. Canada needs to move past that. Society needs to move past that and get comfortable with the fact that Indigenous people we're here to stay. This is our land, and more importantly, we're more than willing to teach. That's the beautiful part of it all.
Yeah, absolutely. That's also the thing, we're storytellers, innately we're storytellers, we grew up, we want to teach, we want to talk, we want to have these conversations. I grew up having tough conversations all the time. It was very open in our family, and I think it was so helpful for the way I grew up, and that shaped me to be able to have, open dialogue about social issues and issues that pertain to personally or family. And I don't know I wouldn't say that anyone I know, in my community doesn't want to teach or doesn't want to be there. I don't think that we want the onus to be on us. Yes. I don't think you want it, this is the burden, and you want to backpack it on us, and you want to be the only person there, and it should be this, you're the token person of this group, and you have to explain us. That's not what we want, but we want an equal opportunity to educate in a proper way and be respected for it.
Yes.
That's what it comes down to, is respect. And again, thinking about this idea of equity and balance in Canada, and it's just not there. And of course, in 5 years, I don't want to be having these conversations.
Yeah.
Either. I mean, I will have these conversations, but I don't want to, because it is exhausting just thinking about it all the time. When I was in Buffalo, I mean, the relationship between the Indigenous in America and Indigenous in Canada and settler population is very, of course, different and varies. But, I was in Buffalo, New York, surrounded by reservations. It's a Haudenosaunee Nation. Tuscarora's right there. Seneca's right there. You're surrounded. I'm going to school. They have 2 campuses. There's over 50,000 students going to this school. It's a large school. It's also a university, city, kind of town idea. And I was 1 out of 5 Indigenous instructors at the school. And I was only, I was teacher of record for painting and 2D design courses, but I wasn't even, I'm not tenured. There's one tenure track Indigenous teacher at University of Buffalo. There's less than 200 students of Indigenous descent at University of Buffalo. And I thought it was so interesting, and I started thinking, okay, I don't think that disparity rate is different in Canada necessarily either, because we well know that the support for Indigenous students is lacking.
Yes.
It's also jarring to go from a community-based education at home with your family in your own community to, let's say, if you want to go to the University of Alberta. It's very different. Things are different, and the support is not there. So the dropout rate is wild. And it's astounding to me. They just need community. Everyone needs community.
Yes.
But I think Indigenous youth definitely need community, because they're being ostracized at every moment that it can happen. Yes. They're being questioned at everything. They're being looked at, hyper-visualized more than anyone else, I find.
Constantly having to validate their existence.
Yeah, the fact that they're alive and that they're there.
Yeah.
And so I imagine it's just so frustrating for people, to go to, I don't know, I don't even know how you would do it, leave a remote location, let's say, and then, you're supported by your family and everyone. You see yourself and you're represented there, and that's support in itself. Mm-hmm. To then go to, you're talking about being the principal of this homogeneously different landscape for yourself, but also you're being looked at in a different way too.
Yes.
And you got to say, what gives? What is that? And how is that possible when there's so many people that I know, that that are qualified, that are willing, that want to do it? So what does it come down to? What does that mean?
Yes.
A lot of questions and a lot of frustration, a lot of head shaking.
Oh, yes. Yeah, and then the challenges for Indigenous students don't stop after high school. Like you said, you transition into post-secondary, and then, the challenges of adapting to that. And yeah, we're very close to our families and communities, and it's hard being away from them. And then when you add in things that are happening in the communities. Again, what a lot of us encounter is death, grief, loss. You carry that with you wherever you go. See, that's the challenge that often non-Indigenous settlers miss sometimes, is that as an Indigenous person, we carry our community with us wherever we go. The beautiful, the challenging, all of the in-between. And so it's very difficult for us to separate, okay, I just get to go to work, or I just get to go to school, and I'm here and I'm 100% focused and engaged. Whereas it's, no, I've got this on my mind, I've got this family member, I've got this community issue on my mind, and I'm trying to do everything to be a successful student.
And you have to try 10% or 110% harder to be successful.
Yeah, navigate through these often white systems that we have to survive and thrive in. So it's very challenging, and we need to just continue to see the Indigenous representation, and also in roles of leadership positions. That's what it comes down to, speaking to education anyways. But yeah, your work is so important. I love how you are using it to change systems. I'm going to say that. Your work is part of changing systems. It's it's real and raw, and it's necessary. That's how I would describe your work.
Thank you. That's
in a nutshell. And for our listeners, if you get a chance to see Julia Rose Sutherland's work, you need to go out and see it, because it will change how you look at things. It will bring forward your own questions within your own identities, within your own assumptions, the communities you're part of, or that maybe perhaps you need to see yourself becoming more part of, because it's important work. And she's one of many Indigenous artists who are out there and who are bringing this forth to society. And that's what we need. And you are such a beautiful, incredible teacher. Hand to heart, and I'm walking along with you. We are supporting you. Our community is supporting you, and the artist community that you're part of, I know you're very well respected, and I want to give a shout out to those galleries and those curators that acknowledge and really recognize the kind of work that you're doing, and they are participating in the activism with you by supporting your work and showing your work, because an artist can create beautiful things, but if their work is not seen, I mean, that's a disservice to society.
Absolutely. The platform is there, and it's great that, the initiatives to showcase, more BIPOC artists is happening, and it's happening more and more. And I'm so happy about that. It's great. It's good to see diversity in the art scene and diversity in the perspectives. And I'm glad that it's happening, and I'm so fortunate and humbled that I have people who want to showcase that and help me show my work and give a platform, not only to, my work, but to the issues that I'm trying to convey and trying to educate people on.
Yes, wow. Well, keep it up, and I can't wait to see what you create next. I mean, just the quill work, and we do a lot of quill work too in my community, and I just admire the women that, and you, like yourself, who can, it's so intricate. It's very intricate, and it's not only your eyes, it's your hands, it's hand-eye coordination, and then it's the patience that comes along with it, and then the creating. You're tapping into your artistry. There's so many skills that are just immersed in all of that. It's a lot, again, just artists don't get enough of that understanding of the labor of love that goes into creation. There's so many hours. I mean, you see it in the exhibit, you see it in the gallery, and all the beautiful aesthetics that are put together to present the work, but people don't get to see what has gone on, the hours, the countless hours, the research that goes into it as well, and the conversations or whatever you needed to do to create that piece. And I just think it's incredible. If someone could actually sit behind the scenes and watch what an artist does like yourself, they would just be in shock.
They think you're very silly for spending all this time. It's okay. Even now, just prepping quills, a labor of love for sure, and of pain.
Wow.
You get yourself. But I mean, it's also, it attaches me to my roots a bit, and it grounds me. So it's nice. So for me, I love to do it, and of course you have to love it. Otherwise, we wouldn't spend hours and hours cutting washing quills, cutting quills, flattening quills. Then the quill work begins, designing, using it, embellishing, embroidering. It's wild. But yeah, I feel really happy to be doing it. I feel it's such a beautiful practice, and I'm glad to be doing something traditional in a non-traditional way.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very nice.
Wow. All right, my dear, I am going to move us into the final 4 questions. I know you and I could spend hours talking, days talking, because I just love listening and learning from you and just our connection and what we share. And anybody who gets a chance to sit with this beautiful artist is just, it's a gift, because Julia has so much to share and there's so much to learn from her. And she is a beacon of light and hope, and beauty and the gifts you share with the world. So I'm grateful there's people like you out there and in our communities that are creating this very necessary work. So just to give you a little overview of the final 4, it's questions that I get to ask my lovely guests, and they don't have a clue of what I'm going to ask them.
Surprise!
It's like a pop quiz question.
I love it. Okay, great. Let's do it.
Okay. Alrighty. So as I sat here and, I'm thinking about the work that you do and, who you are as an artist. Who are you as a person, Julia?
Oh, I'm a weirdo. I'm a Virgo, if that helps anyone understand. I'm critical. I'm analytical in lots of ways, but I'm a weirdo. Like, I just love people, and I show up to these events and I have so much enthusiasm all the time, and then I have to run away because I was too enthusiastic. That's who I feel I am. Wow. I give lots. Whenever I'm in a situation or I'm somewhere, I'm 100% there. Until I'm not in that situation, then I'm 100% off in a new world, Yeah. So I would say weirdo.
I love that. You're in good company. I'm a weirdo too. I love that. No, that's great. Says a lot about you. And yes, Virgos. I'm a bit of a horoscope nerd, so I know that you Virgos can be very serious at times, but underneath there's a lot of excitement bubbling and mystery. But when you speak very thoughtfully, and you don't just throw words out there to throw them out there. It's all with intention, and you're also very kind and patient people. I say that because my nephew and my brother-in-law, they're Virgos. So.
Oh, yeah, you see, firsthand what's our little isses.
Yes.
All those things that we are.
Oh, I love it. Okay, so is there a dream residency? And we're not even just talking programs that are already built, but somewhere in the world where you would love to go to do a residency, and why?
Oh, that's a great question. Oh, what is my dream residency? I would actually like to just be at home on the Mi'kmaq Nation. My dream would be for somehow to have enough money to just be at home and working with my Uncle Jeffrey for a full year, just learning how to be a firekeeper. Just a sweat lodge. Like that for me would be the best. And to be able to bring my sister Amanda with me, I think it would be amazing. Yeah, that's what I would like to do. I've been very fortunate. I have a lot of opportunities to go away. The Bema Center of Contemporary Art, which have invited me to stay with them next summer, is like a dream for me. MacDowell is a dream for me. There's the Guggenheim residency is a dream. But really, I just want to go home and spend time. Like, I have enough money and expenses to do a project just to be there and spend time with my family, and then make some. I don't know if you make anything. You also don't have to make anything. The expectation of going into residency and not making something would also be very beautiful, to just learn.
Well, the experience you take with you, and then it will come out in your work at some point. Yeah. I love that pressure to not create. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. That's wow. And wow, I love that. Yeah, going home to have that time And and you were in Paris too last
yes.
January. Was it this January?
Was this
right before
January?
COVID.
Yeah.
Yes.
Actually, the first kind of COVID signs were coming out. We're traveling. We're like kind of aware this is kind of happening. And then we got back and there was like full-fledged shutdown. So we were very lucky to
made
get
it
back.
home.
You had to make it home. But that was amazing. Yeah, to show in Paris, France, like that was a lot for me.
Everybody, Julia Rose is amazing. I'm just putting it out there. She's kind of a big deal.
Don't look at me.
Okay. All right. So the third final four questions. What was one of your most challenging pieces to create?
In Punin, there was the full-body sugar casts. It was challenging in the fact that it was the first time I ever did a full-body cast mold. So, you have to work collaboratively. I had Skyla Bjorgsen and Kit McNeil help me physically make it because they had to cast my nude body on a slab kind of deal. And then also just the time it took to make. I would have to... It would be pot after pot of boiling sugar that would caramelize to pour into it. That would be the actual molds. It was laborious, but it was like the mental fatigue of it all. And it's because the piece, the initial start of that piece kind of started in 2014 on my 22nd birthday. I had to ID my mom's body. And that was kind of what started this piece in a way. It was like seeing my mother in my likeness, out of all my sisters, we looked the same, but the most. And to see her, deceased, it was awful. It was hard. I don't think I'll ever forget, that day. And so years later, like this is always on my mind. I'm thinking about the idea of the corpse. I'm thinking about the body, the lifeless body. And so while making this work, without even realizing until it was made, it was my mother's. So for me, it was really difficult. And then, when my grandmother, Noella Ward, came to see me in Buffalo for my thesis show, she came in and she walked into the room. It was just the deeply loved flesh sign we talked about and the body. And she started crying. She said, "That's your mom." So whether or not people knew, it had many different connotations. We're talking about the idea of mortality. We're talking about sugar and consumption of the body. Again, the capitalistic consumption and missing and murdered Indigenous women and violence against women, especially Indigenous women. It had all these things happening. But for me to have my grandmother walk in there and for her to say, "That's Barbara," it was a hard work. And it still is. It was gratifying. I thought it turned out amazing, and I'm excited to recreate the work, but it was very hard to make, and it was really hard to see. Yeah.
Wow. You and Amanda and your other sister are you're so strong. My heart goes out to you for the loss of your mom, and yet from the photos that I've seen, I see her and you ladies, and she's with you, and connected to you always. And what a beautiful way to honor her, and also to work through your healing with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because you have these nuggets in your mind. I'm like, I don't know where this came from, but clearly it came from that one. I can I'm like, oh, there's that moment of visceral sadness, of something traumatic, and that thing they stay with you. Those are scars and things that stay with you forever, and they make you stronger if you let it. And art, of course, has been something I've always used to cope, or to use as a catalyst to help me move through. And I think that's really important, and it's a good motivator in a lot of ways. But it's also important to say, how do I help other people? Well, what can I do with this work? Can it help other people besides just myself? I think when I was younger, it was about myself. I was making work about myself and my own perspectives. And of course, that's what you do as an artist in a way. But it's also, I think, the job of an artist is to point out what you see, and to say, hey, do you see that? And what is that? And to question these things, and to question authority, question perceptions, all these things.
That's beautiful, and so generous to think of others through creating your work. And I'm glad you brought that piece up. That I wrote that down. Sugar hands. That was the other piece I wanted to talk about, your sugar cast piece, because I remember talking with you when you came 2 years ago, I believe, and worked with the students, and I was very fascinated by it. And I remember asking you, did it really taste like sugar? And
Oh, yes. It's pure sugar.
Yeah.
It was amazing. It smelled like sugar. Like making the work was really interesting because I was in the small studio at the university, and anyone who came into the hallway of that area was like, oh, Julia's working, because it could smell like candy. It was so sickly sweet. Like I thought like, oh, like I already have a predisposition to diabetes. Like it's going to happen now because I'm just like inhaling this, like breathing it in, and it's like all over my work and my walls. Like and it's sticky. And the kind of a beautiful thing about the work is it's really ephemeral in this fact that it's always changing and transforming.
Yeah.
It was in a basement gallery, so over time it was absorbing water.
wow.
And it went from like the sedimentary rock looking thing, this body, like you could see every layer, into pure glass, like just amber glass that you could see through. And then it started melting. And then I took it apart, took the head, put it in a box, sent it to Justin Trudeau, and I heard nothing back. But I've heard nothing. So Trudeau, if you hear this, nothing? Not even a call?
Still waiting.
Yeah, I'm waiting.
Wow. I mean, come on. That commitment and that public statement to do the missing and murdered Indigenous women's inquiry. Still waiting on that.
Yeah, still waiting for your response.
Wow.
I got time. I'm here. For now, I guess.
Amazing. Wow. Oh my gosh. You're one of the most fascinating people I've ever met, Julia. There's so much I want to ask you and unpack with you. And well, we're going to continue this anyways.
Absolutely.
Okay, so just as you talked about your mom and your beautiful grandmother, your mother Barbara, your grandmother Noella, and of course your beautiful sisters, I see that, and I see all of that feminine and strength of the women around you, and the others, your grandmothers as well, and also your other grandmother on your dad's side. My question to you to close our beautiful time together in conversation is, being an Indigenous woman, if you can finish that sentence, being an Indigenous woman is
powerful. I think, being an Indigenous woman, I wrote this in my thesis too, the most dangerous thing to society is an educated Indigenous woman. Not because of anger or grievances, but because of power and because of resilience. So I think it's powerful. We've been through a lot, and we will continue to be through a lot, but we'll make it through. And that says a lot about how you deal with pain, how you deal with trauma, how you deal with adversity in the world. So I would say being an Indigenous woman is powerful. And we're looked upon as not powerful a lot. So I think it's the other hand, Yeah.
beautiful. Wow, you are a beautiful person inside out, Julia, and the world is a much better place because of people like you who create, who inform, who hold accountable, who share, who heal, and who love. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm like gonna cry. Stop.
I just want to share with our listeners, I'm so deeply honored to have had this time with Julia Rose. And I think of our connection, and I think of connection of our women, and when we have this time to sit and talk. And this is how it used to be. We used to have the time and make the time to sit and talk, and that's ceremony in itself, because there's tears shared, there's laughter, there's questions posed, there's things that we share, and it's an honor to have had this time with Julia Rose. And I just want our listeners to make sure that I will put up the links so you can follow Julia through her social media as well as on her website, and you can, make the time and find out where she's exhibiting next. And if it's in your area, go out and see her work, because it's deeply profound, and it will change the way you think and feel about things, even in your own life and about the world around you, and your understandings of Indigenous people I'm grateful. I'm honored. My heart is full. And I just can't wait to continue to share this, what I've learned today. I'm going to walk away from this conversation that I've had with Julia Rose today, and I'm going to share what I've learned. And I know that all of you who are listening, you're going to look at things more deeply in your life, and you're going to share what you've learned. And maybe it will inspire you to create some things with your hands, with your mind, with your voice, your words, and your spirit that are going to bring more awareness into the things that matter to you in your own life with the world. Thank you so much, Julia.
Thank you, Andrea. This has been a pleasure. It's been wonderful.